OS 10 Server as a MDM solution for iOS and OS 10 devices. As Sam mentioned, their sessions are being recorded, so you can watch them again later on. And we do have an email address for you to pour questions onto, or you can actually send some to my own email address at QA. So you can see techweek@qa.com for general queries and questions. Please do put my name in there and the session name, which is OS 10 Server as an MDM solution. So when Sam gets the email, she knows where to send them. But if you do have any more technical questions, please do feel free to email me. The address is scott.hayes@qa.com. So now the housekeeping's out of the way, we can actually start looking at OS 10 Server as an MDM solution. So this evening, I'm going to take you through a small PowerPoint presentation, so not too much stress for you after a lovely Easter weekend. And then I will do a demonstration for you of Profile Manager, so you can see what it's involved, the configuration and setup of it, and then hopefully I'll get some profiles deployed and we'll see them affecting both a Mac and iOS device. So we'll start off discussing whether our OS 10 Server is a viable MDM solution. There are many third-party MDM solutions out there, but we're going to concentrate just on looking at the Apple world and iOS and OS 10 devices. We'll see what infrastructure is required for an MDM solution from Apple. It's relatively small, relatively inexpensive, and incredibly easy to set up. We then need to look at actually configuring OS 10 Server. To use Profile Manager, you do have to have OS 10 Server in place, and there are a few very strict requirements to get Profile Manager up and running, but it takes 5–10 minutes to get done, and once you have done that, it's a very simple process to manage. Then we'll actually look at the crux of the thing, which is creating those profiles. So configuring the settings that you would like to roll out to your iOS devices, to your OS 10 devices, or your iOS and OS 10 devices. Some settings do actually mix across. We'll also see how you can configure these for users, so you can send them out to a user and configure the way user environment works, and whether you do that through an individual user or a group. Then there is the actual process of getting the devices connected. Now, there are a couple of different ways of doing this. One is to do it through imaging, so when you actually create your image, you can roll it out for your OS 10 devices. If it's an iOS device, then we could look at using things like Apple Configurator. And if you live in America, you can send your profile to Apple and they will pre-install it on your OS 10 device, or your iOS device for you. We are hoping that service comes to the UK, and we should find out sometime later this year if and when it is going to come to the UK. And then finally, distributing the profiles to your clients through the Apple push notification service and through a manual deployment as well. So you do have the choice of having Apple tell your clients to come and get some updates, or you can email the profiles or email your clients a location where they can actually pick up their own profiles. So the actual infrastructure, the requirements for OS 10 as a MDM solution are dead simple. You need OS 10 Server and you need a valid Apple ID. Now, OS 10 Server just runs as an app on OS 10 Mavericks, so as long as you have Mavericks, you can run OS 10 Server, the latest version. If you haven't upgraded to Mavericks, that's no problem. You can still run Mountain Lion and install the OS 10 version of Server for Mountain Lion, and again, control some of or most of the settings that you can through Mavericks. There are a few new options in Mavericks which actually do make it worth the £13.99 to do the upgrade. So the infrastructure you need, as I said, OS 10 Mavericks and OS 10 Server. Now, you also do need a valid Apple ID if you're going to be using Apple push notification to tell your clients that they have updates. As the Apple ID is actually free, and you'll probably have one as well if you're a member of the Apple Volume Purchase Program, it's well worthwhile sticking with it so that you can actually push out the updates. If you haven't got an Apple ID, well, first of all, they're free, and secondly, they're very simple to set up. You go to appleid.apple.com and create one. You can then utilize that as your connection into the Apple push notification service. It's highly recommended that you do actually sign your profile so they cannot be intercepted and interfered with by somebody sniffing your network or a man-in-the-middle attack. I will actually show you later on the difference between a signed and unsigned profile. Now, we can use self-signed certificates. When you set up OS 10 server, you actually do create a self-signed certificate which you use for code signing, and that will allow you to sign your profiles. The downside to that is none of your clients by default will trust it because it's a self-signed certificate and the clients don't know who the actual legal authority is that signed it for you because it was you. Then the clients will actually require an additional step for you to actually use on your OS 10 and your iOS devices. If you have a commercially signed certificate, then install it, utilize that, and your client will automatically trust it, providing that certificate itself and the legal authority has been trusted by Apple, and all the major commercial ones are indeed trusted. You will need internet access because you are going to be telling Apple we have updates, and Apple will be telling your clients they have updates, and the client will be connecting back to you to get their updates. And I have got a list of the ports at the end of the session that you will need open so you can connect to Apple and go through and send out updates to your clients. So, configuring OS 10 server, there is an absolute requirement, and this is the only one, to use an Open Directory master. You can still integrate this with Active Directory. So if you are a Microsoft house and you're using Active Directory, all you have to do is join your OS 10 client to the Active Directory domain and then set it up as an Open Directory master. And this will allow you then to actually access your users and groups from your Active Directory environment and set them up and push out the profiles to the actual users who are members of those groups. When it comes to Profile Manager, there are several steps we have to go through, and I will demonstrate these for you later on. I'm not going to try and bore you to death with PowerPoint, but you enable it by simply turning it on. You choose your code signing certificate, which we will use the Open Directory code sign certificate for that. If you are going to create your images and put the enrollment profile for your devices into your image, then you will need to go in and create an enrollment profile. It's one click, one name, job done. So we can then add that to images and push them out to clients automatically. We may have to create some placeholders depending on how you're going to use Profile Manager. It's essentially split into two halves where you have your user configuration and your device configuration. Now, the devices themselves will not get automatically added. The actual device side of it is disabled by default, so you will need to go in and add all of your iOS and OS 10 devices. We can do this one by one, but obviously that would be long, boring days, so we can just use CSV files and import them all in one go. And I've actually got a CSV file set up that we can show you how easy it is to import them. If you have got lots of different iOS and OS 10 devices, you may want to create device groups. Now, the device groups are just the same as user groups, but they contain devices rather than people. So we can go and create one for an iOS, for iPad minis, for iPad Airs, and for your OS 10 devices as well. And then finally, how to create groups for users so you can again push out your profiles to each individual user or to a group of users at the same time, ensuring they have all the same settings across the board. So they're your devices, automatic or manual deployment to them. We can choose for different profiles how we're going to create the push out the actual profile updates. We go in, we configure the removal options. We can say whether users are allowed or not allowed to remove these profiles. Obviously, as bring your own device becomes more and more popular, you may want to put some control onto your users when they use their own devices. But obviously, we do have to give them the rights to remove those settings afterwards. So when it comes to profile removal, we just simply choose whether we're going to do or allow it, not allow it, or actually use a password for the users to remove their profile. And it's exactly the same process for users and groups as well. So you choose manual or automatic deployment, you choose your removal options, and then for both of them, we can go in, configure the payload for the profile, configure the settings we want in there, and then allow the profiles to be pushed out to the users. Preparing the devices, as I mentioned, we may need to create a placeholder. You don't actually have to go in and create a placeholder if you're not using it for managing the device side. If you're looking at an MDM solution just for the user side, then there is absolutely no need whatsoever to create placeholders for the devices. We can also get our devices to enroll even if there isn't a placeholder in place for them. We just have to make sure we tell it not to use the placeholders. And then again, if you are going to use your enrollment profile to install into an image, we can go and create those. And the trust profile, this is the tricky part, or not tricky part, but the bit you do need to think about. If you are using a commercially signed certificate, then the users will not have to install the trust profile. If you're not, then they will need to install the trust profile to start with. But again, we can push these out through the imaging and Apple configurator for iOS devices so that these are automatically installed for users. But it is a very quick, simple process they have to go through to get their trust profile and enrollment profiles if needed. When it comes to deploying them through APNs, it really is just a case of save it and job done. Once you've saved the profile, you don't need to tell it to push it out. You don't have to wait. It will automatically go and inform Apple there are updates to your clients. Apple will automatically inform your clients their updates, and your clients will automatically connect back into you to get their updates. However, some people have issues, shall we say, pushing out the information to Apple to tell Apple there are updates, even though Apple actually don't see any of the profile, it's just a token. So you can go and do manual deployment of your profiles. So as you create it, you simply save the profile. You then download that profile itself into a shared area. They are XML files, so you can go in and create your mobile config file, store it on a website or a shared folder, and then simply send your users an email. Or if you're feeling very posh, you can go in, create a web clip, which will simply take them to a web-based version of your profile store, and then your users can click on the profile they wish to download and install it directly onto their device. So the manual option does give you a bit more control, but the automation process of Apple Push Notification service really does make it a smart move to go down that route. So how does APNs work? Well, your OS X server will send a notification to Apple. It will actually use those ports listed on the slide there, 522.3, 2195 and 2196 for communicating with Apple. When it actually sends a notification to APNs, all it does is sends a token saying this device, and whether you use serial number, UUID, IMEI number, has an update. We don't send any information to Apple about the actual profile, and in reality, they really wouldn't want us to, because as more and more people use this, you are going to see a huge amount of information being pushed out, and I don't think Apple will be too happy to deal with all that for us. Your clients will then receive an update from APNs. Now, at the moment, a single Mac Mini can handle up to 5,000 devices, and Apple's test figures on this show that those 5,000 devices can be informed they have updates in a 1 hour window. So it will simply spend the next hour telling your 5,000 devices they have updates. Once your client has actually got the update, it will just send a HTTPS request to your, an SSL request to your profile manager server, and then it will start the process of downloading and installing the individual profiles or even applications on there. So we're sending no information to Apple. Apple don't send us information other than we've got an update. It is all done internally over an SSL connection with the certificate you've configured for the client to go and actually download their profile. Now, if you're managing the network side of it, those ports are required to be open so that we can send data through them. But Apple don't publish which IP addresses you're sending that information to. They keep that to themselves and recommend you simply open up the whole of the 17.0.0.0 address range, as that has been assigned entirely to Apple, and it is their IP address, so you can comfortably know that only they will ever get that information. So that's the whole idea behind Profile Manager. And what I'd like to do now is do a demo from turning on Profile Manager, going in and enabling all the sides we need to from a profile manager point of view. We'll then look at how you actually launch it, go in and create some placeholders for devices both manually and automatically. We will then create some profiles, and then if I've got this set up correctly, we'll actually see them deploying onto both a Mac and onto an iPad. So I'm now going to share my desktop so I can actually take you through the whole of the server process. So as you can see, I'm on a Mac running OS 10, and this icon in the dock at the bottom, which has just popped up saying server, is where a lot of the work will be done to do the initial configuration. After that, we will use Safari to manage all of the profiles and configure it. So everything you will then do afterwards is all done through Safari rather than a static app on your server. So I'm going to connect onto my server. I'll authenticate. Those of you who've been on an Apple course possibly will know that password. It's the same one we use for all of them. And there you can see now that I'm running a server called mainserver.pretendco.com, and my computer name is main server. The rest of the settings on there really don't mean too much. It's just telling me I'm running OS 10 Mavericks, and it is 10.9.1, and I'm running server 3.0.2. If I click on the settings tab of server, I can now go in and enable push notification. So you have the default option down there, which is enable push notification. All I have to do is check the box and enter my Apple ID. So you just have to bear with me if I make any typos. I'm not the world's greatest typer. So as long as I've got the username and password correct, this will now go through Connect to Apple and generate an APNs certificate for me. You are able to check all the certificates you have issued to your Apple ID. When you actually create it, you can go in and manage them through the Apple site, and it will allow you to renew your certificates and revoke your certificates as well. So you can see there now that the certificate has been created for me. It's got 12 months on it, and if I wanted to, I could pop in and manage my actual Apple certificates as well. So this is where I would actually be able to go in and revoke them if necessary. And you can see there the certificate I've just created. It is an active certificate, and I have got no issues with revoking that whatsoever. So now I'm happy that I've got my APNs certificate. I click OK to that, and then I need to make sure I have Open Directory installed. Now, if you do try and install Profile Manager without enabling Open Directory first, it will actually insist you go in and create an Open Directory master. This is just one of the requirements for Profile Manager. If you are going to be joining into an Active Directory environment, then the process you would also have to go through is system preferences, user and group preferences. On the logon options, you would need to join your server into an Active Directory environment. Once that's done, you should be able to see all your users from the Active Directory database available for Profile Manager. If you are interested in that side of it, send me an email and I'll send you the knowledge article the support article from Apple on how to actually go through that for both Mavericks, Mountain Lion, and Lion. But now we have an Open Directory server set up. All I need to do is go into Profile Manager and start configuring it. Now, I have a couple of choices here. I can first of all just turn it on and then enable the settings afterwards, or I can start configuring everything I need to before turning it on. Quick look around the actual screen itself. First, we can see that it is offline, so we aren't actually going to have any profiles being created at the moment. It's telling me device management is disabled. I will need to enable that, and I will go through it. I'll come back to distribute apps and books from the volume purchase program shortly, the rest, because we're not actually going to use that tonight. Signing configuration profiles, please, if you do use this, ensure that you sign your configuration profiles. If not, your profiles are sent as XML files and they are sent in clear text. And if any of those those profiles contain passwords, then obviously the password itself will also be in clear text. It is an absolute must that you sign your profiles. So to sign it, I shall simply tick the box, and then I need to tell it what certificate I want to use. Now I'm going to use the code signing certificate that was created for me when I installed Open Directory onto this computer. If you have a commercially signed certificate, then you can actually use that without any problems. And it is preferable to do that because you actually cut out several steps when the users are picking up their profile. But we're just going to use the code signing one for now, and I will actually click that I'm going to accept the certificate when I install my profiles. Now, the default configuration section, we have a profile automatically created called Settings for Everyone. It's assigned to the group Everyone, which picks up all of your users. So you can go in and have a single profile, which will allow all your users to be configured in one go. If you wish to change the profile name, or you create a different profile for it, then just go in, edit, and change the name of the profile. Just make sure you know what you called your profile and you didn't make any typos in there. And then all your users will actually get the default profile. One of the other features we got is to include configuration for services. Now, this is actually looking at OS X server to see what services we have enabled, and then automatically setting those up for us when we come to use the Settings for Everyone profile. And the nice, simple, easy demo of this is if you look in the middle of that 5, you've got the icon for mail. And we can see on the left-hand side in the sidebar that mail is turned on. We can tell that because of the little green light next to it. If I just pop into mail, turn it off, and then pop back onto Profile Manager, you can see that the mail instantly disappeared from there, so that now I'm not actually going to get those configuration settings done for mail. So I pop back into mail, turn it on, go back into Profile Manager, a few short seconds, the email icon will pop back up in there, and all my configuration is now done for email, and there it is. So now we've got everything set where I want to. Sorry, I did mention I would talk about the distribute apps and books from the volume purchase program. If any of you are a member of Apple's VPP, then what you can actually do is just drag your token straight into there, and then that will allow you to distribute apps and books through Profile Manager by using your volume purchase token. You will need to go to Apple to have a look at the volume purchase program if you're not a member. You do need to be a valid company, and you do need to have a DUNS number to join in. But once that is all configured, you can then go and prepay for your apps or pay for them in advance and add them in and distribute them to your users. Obviously, it depends on the apps you're looking at, because if you look at the major commercial ones, the PowerPoint, Word, Excel, or if you're going down the Apple iWorks route for Pages, Keynotes, and Numbers, depending on when you bought your Mac or your iPad, those are now free, so we can add them in to any user without having to go through the VPP. But if you've got some big paid-for products, then you can simply drag your VPP token into there, and all your apps can then be deployed directly to your users. As I say, we're not going to be doing that, so I shall clear that tick box out. Now I have everything configured, it's simply a case of turning Profile Manager on, waiting the few seconds that it takes to actually start up and configure it, and then once enabled, I can pop onto the management side of Profile Manager. Now we have a few little arrows that have suddenly popped up on the screen. These are shortcuts that Apple provide for us. So this one here at the top is simply going to get help from the Apple website on how to configure devices. So we will see well clear of that one. The second one allows you to easily go into the user portal, signing as yourself from your own device, but it allows you to see the environment that users will see and what users have to do. And we're actually going to do that once we've created a few profiles. The one you will use the most, though, is the one at the bottom that says Open Profile Manager. Now, all this is going to do is open up Safari. It's going to take me to mainserver.pretendco.com/profile manager, which is that address at the top, which is where I go to manage Profile Manager. From a user's perspective, it's mainserver.pretendco.com in this case, /my-devices, and that's where they can go and manage their devices if they want to, including wiping and locking the devices remotely should they be lost. So we'll open up Profile Manager and we'll see all the different options in there. Now, that would normally ask me to authenticate, but as I'm lazy, I actually added the username and password to the keychain, so it's automatically dumped them in there for me, so I don't have to keep remembering all the different passwords. And you can see on the left-hand side, it's fairly basic at the moment. It just gives us the option for apps, users, and groups. So if we have a look at apps, we can go in and we can add apps from the volume purchase program. I haven't got any, and the link takes you to Apple so that you can start thinking about joining the volume purchase program. Depending on which section you're in, whether it's education or business, they do split it up for you. You do need to remember this is quite American-centric, so you will need to change your country code. So we can go to the UK, and you can see there are very few countries that actually have the VPP. So we are quite lucky in the UK we do have VPP available to us. So we'll pop to the business store, and it will take you from there onto signing in and getting your VPP token. If you want to know more, then Apple do have a full website on joining the VPP. So it's apple.com/UK business/VPP. So if I also have an enterprise environment where I develop my own apps, I can go and add these into here as well. Obviously, you don't necessarily want some high quality app that you've written yourself going on the App Store and your users downloading it from there and you paying Apple 30% for the privilege. So if you are an organization that develops your own apps, you can join the Apple Developer Program. It costs around $200 a year, and it allows you to distribute your apps to your users. You can distribute them in-house. You can actually go and set up your own little website that looks like the App Store or the Mac App Store for distributing those apps, and you keep all that deployment internal there. If you don't want to join the enterprise program, then you can go and deploy the apps through the App Store, but you will also still need a developer program to actually do that. So again, we're not going to add any apps tonight. We're just going to manage the users and devices. So you can see that devices aren't showing. Now, the reason devices aren't showing is I actually forgot to click on Enable Device Management. So as I didn't enable it, there will be no devices showing in the list. So I just quickly need to enable device management there. So configure. It goes through and checks the devices, gets the settings ready from Apple so it knows it's got all the latest options available. Click on next. And now I need to just put a little bit of details in there so that I can identify myself when the client's connecting to the server. So we're going to leave the actual default settings available. I pick my code signing certificate that the clients are going to use for connecting into the server so that they can make sure the SSL connection down to them for the delivery of the apps is secure. Now you can see there it's actually telling me the certificate isn't signed by a trusted root authority. This will involve me adding that certificate to the clients. Now the easy option is for the client to do that themselves, but you must make sure you educate users about just blindly accepting certificates without actually knowing where they're coming from. So we'll click next on that. When I'm happy with the settings, I hit finish, and that will actually configure Profile Manager for me and do the device management. So now I've actually remembered to do that, I can just pop back onto the website, and now I have devices available to me. So when we come to look at the devices, you can go through and add them one by one, which will obviously, with some organizations, could take a very, very long time. So to add individual devices, we click plus, we click add placeholder, and we decide what type it is. Now we can choose between configuring for both iOS and OS 10, or for Apple TV. So a lot of educational authorities now are looking at Apple TVs within the classroom to help with the teaching aids. So if you want to configure those, we can now manage the Apple TVs through Profile Manager as well. But we're going to do an iOS OS 10 device, and we're going to make up a nice simple little name. So we'll call it QA, and then maybe Mac Pro, and we'll then put a random text on the end of it, and we'll make up a dodgy serial number as well. So we'll just type in as few letters and characters so it looks something like a serial number. I click add, and I've now got my one device in there. Obviously, if I've got hundreds, that really wouldn't help. I wouldn't want to do that all day long because I'll most likely get the serial numbers wrong. So I can import placeholders, and these just have to come from a CSV file. So if you keep a record of all your iOS and OS devices and the serial numbers in an Excel spreadsheet, you can easily export those into a CSV file and then import them into your profile manager. So I should have, if I remember where I placed them, a device list of file there, which is just a CSV file. If we actually have a quick look at it, you can see it's just a whole bunch of names and serial numbers. We could put MEIDs, UDID or IEMI numbers in there, but we're actually just going to import it by the serial number. So all I have to do is import them, and it should now go through, and you can see we have a nice collection of devices. Now, one of the nice things that we can do when it comes to importing placeholders is if we pop into Excel and open up that, and let's just say that we've got a new device that we've added. So we'll say this one's another Mac Pro. This is just me dropping hints to Sam that she needs to buy me a Mac Pro for doing this tonight. We'll give it a number, and then just so we can see it actually really did work, we will put in a serial number of this works. Now, obviously I've already got several devices listed in this file. What I wouldn't want to happen is when I come to import the file again, is for it to duplicate and then triple the number of options I have in there because it's importing the same files again. So we'll just save this as a CSV file. We'll replace and overwrite the one that's already there. And we'll just double check I did actually save that. So I'm going to my documents, into device list, and right at the bottom is that QAMP5563 and the serial number of this worked. So when I go to add again and I import placeholders, again select the file and choose, and now you can see that the list hasn't really grown. I've just got that one extra device in there, which is my one I just created. So now that I've got all my devices in there, I can actually start going through the process of configuring them, setting them up, and setting up my profiles for them. So I'm just going to go in and pick one of these devices I've actually got set up. And I'm looking for the one I know is an actual real computer that's sat next to me. And it should be that one there. So first things first, we have general information about it. We can see the serial number. Now, as these devices enroll, they will actually start filling in a lot more information about it. So we will get the make, the model, and the operating system version on there. Security settings, what security I've gone in and put on there, whether I've enabled firewall to protect my hard drive, whether I'm forcing passcodes so the users can't go in and just leave them so they're unlocked all the time and they don't have to keep typing in their passcode, because apparently some people get fed up with that. Personal and institutional recovery key for Firewall 2. So we can go in and check to see if they've been set or not. And activation lock enabled. Hopefully on every single device you will see the word yes there, because activation lock should be an absolute must in case your device is stolen or lost. Restrictions, we can go in and see how we can put the restrictions on there, both from passwords, from what websites are allowed to access, whether even things like the cameras enabled. We can go in and see what restrictions we place there. We can even see the apps that have been installed. If we do go and create device groups, we can see the device group that this computer is in and any certificates. But that's just general information. What we're really excited about is the settings. And this is where I can go in and create my individual profiles. So all I have to do is click edit. Now the general setting is the bit that just tells you about the profile, why you're using it and what you're going to be doing with it. The first part we have is the automatic or manual distribution. So automatic push is via APNs and you save it and that's it. Or with manual downloads, this is where we would save it. We would then make it available to the users via an email or via a website, and they can download it themselves. Put a brief description in there so you know what the profile's for. Maybe even a date and time when you actually created it so people can tell what was going on with the profile. So we'll just call this one a test profile for classroom. Told you I couldn't type. Classroom IMAX. Now, these are quite useful different options. The security allows us to decide what's going to happen with the profile when a user wants to remove it. So we can say it's always available for removal, so they can just go into profiles, either in the system preferences or in the general settings on their Mac, iOS device, and delete the profile. We can say it's removable with authorization, so they would have to enter a password to be able to remove it, and that's something that you can control and decide what the password is. And then there's never. This will obviously prevent them from removing their profile. This is a very useful little option if it is your Mac or your iOS device you've issued out to the user, and you do not want them having their own control of it and doing whatever they want with it. So you can go in there and decide that the profile cannot be removed. The automatically remove profile, this allows you to say never automatically remove it. Obviously that's quite a useful one, on a certain date or after an interval. So if you're renting out or you're hiring out profiles to students at a school, you can say, okay, at the end of the year we will remove the profiles, or if students are bringing their own iPads to school, again, you could put a profile on there that forces certain settings, and then at the end of the school year, you can have it automatically remove the profile from them. Once you've decided what you're actually going to do for your security, we can then actually start moving on to the profiles themselves. The first thing to note is at the top it says this is for OS X and iOS. If we look about halfway down the list, it is just for iOS, and then slightly further down we have the OS X settings as well. So the profile screen is actually broken into three, so it gives us the settings that are available for both iOS and OS X, settings that are pure iOS, and settings that are pure OS X. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to configure a passcode. So I'm going to say that you must have a passcode on your device. We're going to allow a simple one. We're not too worried about it being alphanumeric, but we're going to say we want it to be a minimum of 6 characters. You can then go in and look at complex characters, so the symbols on your keyboard, the maximum passcode age, so how long before users are forced to change it, the maximum auto lock, how long before the device will lock when there has been 0 activity. So maybe we'll set that to 1 minute. Passcode history, that's obvious one, how long we're going to store it for. Grace periods for locks, so if you do lock your device, how long you can wait before it'll ask you for the passcode. Sometimes maybe you lock it by mistake by pressing the sleep wait button, or you put your computer to sleep by moving the mouse to one of the hot corners, how long you've actually got before you can actually go in and it not prompt you for the passcode. Just a word of warning on this one, a maximum number of failed attempts. Do be wary, don't set it too low, because if you read the note underneath, it says number of passcode entry attempts allowed before all data on the device will be erased. It doesn't mess around, it will just go and wipe all the data. We'll have a quick look through some of these settings. I'm not going to go into all of them because some of them are pure networking and realistically we don't have the time, but some of them are very useful. One word of warning, if you are playing with Profile Manager and trying it and seeing what is in there, when you go into a profile, if you don't click cancel or this minus button and you actually click OK, it will go in and create a payload for you automatically. So I'll actually show you that one in a second. So we'll say OK to that. I can go in, and if I go into network, click on configure and just say OK. Sorry, that was a bad example of one to use because it does require an SSID. Let me just cancel that for a second. I'm just trying to think of one that I'll actually go in and it will force you to do some settings. So there you go. I didn't touch anything in dock. I just went in, had a browse, had a look around, didn't change any settings in there. But as soon as I said OK, it actually saved that as a payload. So that would then start looking at deploying it. You do want to check down the side that if you haven't configured something, it's not saying there are any payloads configured. If it does, just simply click the minus button and that will remove the payload for you. So if we go in now, network is actually quite a useful one because it allows us to go in and say what type of network the users are going to connect to. So in our case, we have a Wi-Fi network we offer out to everyone, called training_AP_public. If you're using hidden SSIDs, tell the profile it is a hidden SSID and it will set it for you. Automatically join the wireless network and configure your proxy and what security type you're using as well. So again, if you're an enterprise environment, you've got 8021X wireless networking, then go in and make sure you save that it's WPA, WPA2 enterprise. If it's a home user where you enter a WPA, WPA2 key, then personally I would set it to any personal, and obviously we stay well away from web. And then just enter your password. Now, again, we'll look at some of these profiles without code signing on there so you can see the difference on them. But if we accept that one, that's now, again, you can see I have a network and a passcode payload in there. If we go and add maybe a third one for OS 10, and maybe you want to do login window. You want to control what the users actually get to see when they log in. So we can go in there, we can decide. Are we going to show any information in the menu bar at the top? Are we going to have a list of users, or are we going to have a name and password text field? So if you've used the map before, you'll know you can have it so you have a little graphical icon that pops up and the user enters their password, or we have a box where the username and password is entered. Personally, I do prefer the username and password. And then again, they show the sleep, restart, and shutdown buttons. If you don't want a computer being shut down or put to sleep by just about anyone, then make sure that that box is unticked. Otherwise, it will display those options at the bottom of the screen, and any user can go in and shut down your Mac or restart it. So I personally don't ever have that ticked. And then again, options, so show password hint when needed and available. So if the user forgets a password and enters it incorrectly 3 times, then they will go in and be given a hint. We can have things like fast user switching. If it's a network, then it won't actually work because network's disabled fast user switching. But if you want to make sure users can do fast user switching, you can select that. Allow a guest user, start screensaver X amount of time. So again, generally quite a few nice little options in there. And allow users and groups to log onto the computer or deny them, so you can choose which users are allowed to log on, which users aren't. We'll have just that one in there. So you can see for just that one computer, I've now got several profiles on there. And if I wanted to roll that out to all of my computers, obviously that could be quite a, well, basically a big pain going in and creating it individually for each different computer. So what I can do is I can create, save it first, and then create some device groups. So device groups are just groupings of your devices. So we'll create several groups. The first one we're going to call iOS devices. And we'll create another group. Sorry, I keep going to click save. We'll create another group called OS 10 devices. And we'll save that. And then I'm going to go and quickly create a few groups. One called iPad Air. We'll create another group called iPad Mini. And finally, iPad 3. So I've got groups now for my individual iOS devices, and I've got one for all iOS devices. So simple process. I select iPad Mini. I look on the members at the moment, and I've got none. So I can now go in and add my devices. So all I shall look for is the short name, which is QA IPM. So any that I've got in there will be my iPad Minis. So I'll add that, and that one. I then pop onto my iPad Air, and again I do the same there. So whatever code I'm using or whatever identification I've got for spotting my iPad Airs, that should be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So again, quite quick and easy to add your individual devices. And then finally, we will add the iPad 3. If anybody from Apple is on here, sorry, that should have been the next generation iPad. So I'll add the iPad 3 and save. Oops. There you go. That was actually an intentional mistake. I clicked the wrong group. So you can see the three of them in there. If I want to remove them, I just click the X and that removes them from that device group. So I'll go onto the iPad 3 now so you can see just how easy it is to add them back in. So now I've got my three groups, my iPad 3, my iPad Air, and my iPad Minis. Obviously, they are all iOS devices, so I can now go onto my iOS device and add some device groups and select the device groups I want to add. And now my iPad 3, my iPad Air, and my iPad Minis are all members of the iOS devices. So now, if I want to go in and configure settings for all of my iOS devices, again, I would just simply go through, configure the profiles, and say what settings I actually wanted to do. So, brief description, and we'll say it's all iOS devices. We're not going to allow them to remove the setting, and they will never be automatically removed. And on this one, maybe we want to look at subscribed calendars. So this will be connected back into an Exchange environment where you can go and connect in as a read-only option for your subscribed calendar. So everyone should then get their calendars automatically updated. So it would just be a case of go in and configure it, put the URL of the calendar in there, and a username and password that is going to go in and read the calendars. Again, if you want to use SSL, so you're forcing the HTTPS connection, and that should then pull down to your iOS devices any subscribed calendars you have within Exchange. Now, I know there is a small issue that a couple of people I've spoken to are having with this. I tried it over the weekend and it did work with the subscribed calendar. So I know, James, I think you're actually on the session tonight. If you've got me an email, I'll try and talk you through and show you what actually got to happen. So we can go in and configure our settings for our individual, all of our iOS devices in one go. So that's configuring it for devices. You can see it's fairly straightforward. We set up the groups, we set up individual iPads and Macs, set their settings for them, and then go in and configure the settings we need. One question we always get is what happens if you have two different settings configured in two different areas. So maybe in the group for iPad Airs, I went in and I decided that I didn't want, think of a nice easy setting for it, I didn't want a passcode setting of simple values, and I wanted to put some alphanumeric values in there, and I wanted a minimum of 10 characters in the passcode. So I'm going to set that for my iPad Airs, but when I go to my individual devices and I select iPad Air, and I can actually quickly check on this one, and it shows me it's in iPad Air device group. So I go into this one and select for my passcode that I don't care about simple values, I don't care about alphanumeric, and minimum pass length, 2 characters will do. So if I now have these two settings going down, or two payloads going down to my iPad Airs, which one will actually win? Well, it's an incredibly simple way to work it out, whichever is the most restrictive. So as I've got two now, one that says I want 3 settings and one that says I want 10, then the payload that says you have to have 10 characters in your passcode will be the prevailing one. So it always works on the idea of most restrictive. So now I've done my user devices, I can now go in and have a look at all of my users. So again, I've got lots of users listed, and I can go and pick on any of these users and decide how I'm going to configure them. Now again, settings, I can go and configure individual settings for the users. I can see what apps I want to install and configure my apps. I can see if the user is associated to any particular device, because I can go and associate a user to a particular device if I want to. So this user will go in and will give them access to that iMac, and so that iMac is associated to that user. And activity would just show me exactly what's been going on with my device when this user or the device they actually have has downloaded a profile. But again, I can now go in, edit the profile. And what you will notice is that some of the settings are quite similar, but there will be some settings which are slightly different because they are obviously user-based rather than computer-based. One of the obvious ones that will be missing there, hopefully, is the fact that the directory service option is not available. Because obviously it's the computer that joins the Active Directory or the Open Directory environment, not the individual user. But let's say I wanted to go and configure this user with some parental controls. I could go in and we could say, okay, let's hide profanities in the dictionary and limit access to websites. And then we can put in a list of URLs that the user is actually allowed to go to. So we'll go for this one. We'll say maybe, well, we have to obviously have QA in there. Maybe we'll also have Apple in there. So that user would now be restricted to just those two websites. I can go and say that, and that user will now get those parental controls set. And again, I can go in and I can create groups. Now, it's automatically pulled the groups I've actually got set up on the computer at the moment, but I can again go into users and computers and create some groups in there. I can pull them down from an Active Directory environment, or I could do it through Server App itself and actually create the groups through there. The all settings profile that we saw earlier on is actually this one here. So when we've got the group everyone and all users, the profile for this, the settings for everyone, is that one that we can use from the home screen to go in and configure settings very quickly for all users, and also get the service options set for us as well. So if we go and have a look at this one, what we should notice, if I enable that setting, that is set, so that we should now start, there you go, that's better. We can now see all those settings have come through, and these are automatically now configured for me, so I don't have to do anything when it comes to it. So you can see it's configured my calendar server, it's configured a L2TP VPN server, it's configured my contacts, and it's configured my mail. So all of the base configuration for those is automatically done for me just by saying, yes, please include those services. That saves me a huge amount of time. And again, in here, we can go in and we can configure settings that maybe we want to apply to all users across the board. Now, before I actually show you these loading on, and we'll see how a computer connects on to get their profiles, the one thing I do want to really emphasize is just how scary it can be if you do not go and sign these profiles. So we're on devices, and you can see there that the actual device now, rather than having the profile, the serial number in there actually has a user in there. But if I go and edit this, all I'm going to do is tell it that we want to join a directory service. The server that's going to be hosting this is server 1. Actually, we'll give it a nice name. We'll call it leads dc1.potenco.com. The name of the directory server administrator. So this would be, if it was Active Directory, your actual administrator. And you know how delicate that password can be. So admin, if I can learn to spell. And the password I will set in there. The client ID, we tend not to bother with that one. It is just saying what the actual computer name is when it's connecting to the server. So I shall save that. I shall save that profile. And I will download it as well. So that was actually just the trying to automatically install the profile for me. So that has now been downloaded. And if I have a look in there, I can see I've got settings for QAIM21-5233 .mobile config. So if we have a look at that in Finder first, we can then tell it to open that up with text edit. So those two are actually identical profiles. So if I open that up with text edit, we can see that there's not a lot of useful information in there. Certainly we shouldn't see a password in there. So we can see there we are actually going through directory utilities, and if we go in and do a find on that, and I know that if you've attended a Microsoft course, you'll recognize that password. And I've obviously not got password signing set because that is now showing the password in clear text. So that has actually stored the password in there. We can see the DC name in there, and that shows that the password is then transmitted in clear text. If that was signed, then I wouldn't actually get to see that information in there. It would just be a whole bunch of gobbledygook. So now you've seen setting it up. There are a few little things we can still do on here. One of them is the enrollment profile. Now, by default, as long as your client trusts your profile manager server, it will enroll automatically with just one click of one button. But if you would like to put the enrollment profile onto your devices before you send them out to your users, all you need to do is create an enrollment profile. Call it whatever name you want to. Now, what I would suggest if you've got Mountain Lion and Lion clients is the names you give your profiles, both your trust and your enrollment profile, make sure the trust profile has a name that comes before the enrollment profile in the alphabet. Because when we install them and OS 10 and iOS run the profiles, it will actually look at those two in alphabetical order first. So for making sure everything works on Kidori for the very first time, just make sure your trust profile has a lower in the alphabet name than your enrollment profile. So again, now we've got it created, we can go and say we can restrict this to devices with placeholders only, so it can't get onto rogue computers or by a mistake onto another computer. And on usage, we would actually see the devices that have used this profile to join our profile manager environment. So all I'm going to do is save the profile, and then I download it. Again, I'm not going to install it because I don't want to install this profile onto my computer. I'm going to do a client one, so I won't install that profile on there. But again, if we go into Finder, you can see the profiles in there waiting for me. So that's creating your profile. Now, the next biggie is actually getting the device to connect. So I've got screen sharing enabled to another Mac I've got sat next to me. So we'll connect onto that. And what I will do is I will just go onto Safari. And I've actually already put the address in there. So if we pop into Safari Preferences, you can see that it's actually connecting to https://mainserver.potenco.com and then / and this is the salient part, my devices. So we'll log in as that user we were using before. And you can see now I've got options at the top for devices and for profiles. Now the devices section is where I would enroll this computer into the profile manager environment. But because I'm using self-signed certificates, I really must go in and download the trust profile first. I could, if I want to, download the settings for everyone profile and just install that in a nice, quick, simple way. I'm actually not using Profile Manager further than that. And if we show the contents of that, we can see that the messages, mail, VPN, contacts, calendar, and identification settings are in there. And the profile, you can see, is just a certificate. So this is so I can go in and add my self-signed certificate to my environment. So we're going to install the profile. I have to remember the password. And you can see now that the profile is installed and technically a root certificate for Potenco. If I'd have tried to install the profile without adding the enrollment, without installing that trust profile, I would have had a certificate message pop up asking me if I wish to install the certificate. And on the iOS device, you will actually see that happen as well, and the user will be prompted to trust your profile manager server. You must explain to them exactly what's happening at that point and why they've been asked to trust your certificate and why they must never do that as part of a general process. But if all things work swimmingly, when I click enroll, my device should install an enrollment profile, and installing the remote management enrollment profile is what allows me to go in and manage this device remotely. So all things are looking swimmingly, and you can see automatically that profile I created for this computer has the parental controls and the local entities in the dictionary and swearing and dictation set up. If I told you that was actually my wife, you'd understand why I've said no swearing in there. But you can see that the profiles are now all installed and I haven't had to do much more. Now, the other nice part is that bit. I can now see the computer that she enrolled in the devices section, and it does give me the option to lock or wipe that device. If I lost this iMac or I lost my iPad, then again, I would simply be able to go in and log in to mainserver.pretendco.com from another Mac and then go in and wipe or lock my actual device. If you actually come back to QA on one of the OS 10 server courses, we do this as one of the exercises. You'll see locking it actually takes it down to almost a firmware level lock. It's that stronger lock that they're not going to get access to that computer if you don't want them to. So that's setting it from a client's perspective on a Mac. If I can get the next bit to work, I will be highly impressed because I'm using a little app called Reflector, which allows me to go in and display my iPad onto my desktop screen. So we'll give this a whirl. Hopefully it will work. And you should see my iPad pop up and my actual iPad screen on your session. So we'll pop into Safari. Icon on screen. That's how good Reflector is. It actually makes you think you're actually using a real iPad on your screen. But obviously we're not. So we're going to go to mainserver.pretendco.com/my devices. Now, this is the certificate error. This is because I'm using a self-signed certificate. Under no circumstance whatsoever should your users just click continue and not care, because they've not got any idea where they came from. What we should be doing is having a look at the details. Now, I'm quite happy to go and install this because I know it's I am being silent when I'm typing because I cannot actually multitask. Option to enroll my iPad. And again, if we look in profiles, we can see the settings for everyone and the trust profile. To go and install the trust profile. Go to there, we can start removing that. Again, I will have a bit of a headache. So that time the trust profile went in. Notification and get the client to actually and this is going to take a little bit of quick jiggery pokery from me to make sure I actually. If you think it's going to do 5,000 in a few minutes, you can understand that this doesn't take too long. So if we actually pop back onto Reflector, you can see now that's our Apple Classroom in Leeds. And if we pop back onto there, all I'm going to do is say, clear the box for allow use of camera. Now, what we're actually going to do is we're going to say OK to that. We're going to save that profile. I'm then going to jump straight onto active tasks, and we'll see the task going out. And then in a few short seconds, we'll see my camera turned off on my iPad. So we'll save that. See, sometimes live demos do go astray. So I don't know why that's just kicked that back out. Now, active task, you can see there's a task on there. And if I now, well, actually, you just missed it. I wasn't quick enough. That's how quick it can be, but you can see that the camera app has actually gone from there. Now, if I go back in, say allow use of camera. Again, watching the active task, we'll actually see how quick this actually goes. So we save. There's the task going out. If I go onto my iPad again, the camera's back. Now, that's not me doing a bit of a Paul Daniels in the background. That's how quick the actual process is. So what I will do is I will actually leave as much as I can off the screen, and that way you'll be able to see the camera vanishing. So that's just how quick APNs can actually for you of how Apple Push Notification works, how we go through and configure them, and how we actually can get them deployed. I will now go back to the slide deck. There's nothing. Any questions you may have, you can ask them now, or you can send them through on an email to me. And if you are interested in more on this, we do have a course we run at QA called Deployment and Management of iOS Devices. It's a 2-day course where we go through the whole of actually managing your iOS OS 10 environment, right from the planning, the management of the Apple IDs themselves and how you should use those Apple IDs, and then finally deploying those Apple IDs. Right, this is where I'm going to try and read now.
Just one coming, Scott.
Yeah, using Profile Manager MDM, is it possible to enable activation lock on corporate iOS devices using a centrally managed corporate Apple ID rather than allowing and requiring the end user to enable activation lock. You can certainly enable activation lock within Profile Manager. Whether or not that actually uses the user's own Apple ID or whether it uses your single one that you've used for BPP, I will have to double check that. So I'm not quite sure who sent that question in, but
that was Luke forgive me, Maslany, Luke Maslany.
Luke, if you send that question to me on an email, it's an excellent question. If you send that to me on an email, I will find that out for you, and I will get back to you straight away with the answer to that.
Okay, Scott, we have a question from H. Wainwright. Is there a similar system for publishing books as for apps?
Yes. If we pop back into server, give it a few seconds to load back up. Can you can't see my desktop on this.
Just share my desktop.
Share my desktop. This is all witchcraft to me. Right, so yes, we can go in, and there you go. Distribute apps and books from the volume purchase program. So no problems there. You can happily use that to distribute apps as well. Again, all you have to make sure is you are a member of the VPP.
Brilliant. Another question from Brian Turner. If you remove a profile, do the associated applications also get removed?
Yes.
Okay, fab. And Banu Kiran has asked, how about configure or integrating Apple Server with current Microsoft AD?
With current Microsoft AD, as in Server 2012? If that's the question, yes, no problems.
2008.
2008 again, no problems.
Okay.
Okay, if you email me, I'll send you the link that Apple actually released saying how you go about and what you will need to do. If you've got Mountain Lion or Lion, there's a little bit you need to do in the background on the Mac to get them sharing all the information from Active Directory, but for Mavericks, it's straight through.
Okay, there's nothing else coming in that I can see. There we are. I think that's us, Scott.
That's it. Well, thank you very much indeed for attending. I hope it was informative and useful. And as Sam mentioned, these are being recorded, so you can actually get a copy of it and you can see what we actually did this evening. So thank you very much indeed for attending, and have a pleasant evening. It's still slightly light. We can go and enjoy some brightness. Thanks very much indeed.
Apologies, Scott. Just one final note from me. When you leave this session, our survey will launch in the browser window. So we'd really appreciate you just taking a couple of minutes just to fill in those questions for us. And thanks again. Thanks very much.